Ethan Ross prided himself on his charm. At 32, he'd mastered the art of confidence. The perfect smile, the quick wit, the way he could make anyone laugh in minutes. He was a senior marketing executive at a growing tech firm, ambitious, charismatic, and admittedly a little too sure of himself. He believed he had it all figured out: his career, his social life, and especially his ability to win people over. That morning, as he packed his sleek leather carry-on and adjusted his navy blazer, Ethan felt unstoppable. He was on his way to Singapore for what he assumed would be just another business trip, a week of meetings, presentations, and maybe a little networking at rooftop bars. What he didn't know was that this flight would turn his world upside down. The airport buzzed with its usual chaos, people rushing with coffee cups in hand, announcements echoing through the terminals, and the faint scent of jet fuel mixing with expensive perfume. Ethan loved this energy. It made him feel alive, like he was always on the move toward something greater. As he checked his boarding pass, he noticed he'd been upgraded to first class. "Perfect," he muttered with a smirk, flashing a charming grin at the gate agent who handed him his ticket. When he boarded, the luxurious leather seats, soft lighting, and ambient music set the tone for what he thought would be a smooth and comfortable flight. He placed his bag in the overhead bin, settled into his seat, and loosened his tie slightly. That's when he saw her, the flight attendant who would change everything. She walked down the aisle gracefully, her posture impeccable, her presence commanding yet gentle. She wore the airline's deep blue uniform, but somehow she made it look like couture. Her hair was perfectly tied back, and her smile, calm, professional, and effortlessly magnetic, caught his attention instantly. Ethan leaned back, intrigued. Now this, he thought, is going to be an interesting flight. When she approached to offer a pre-flight drink, he turned on his signature charm. "I'll take a coffee," he said with a grin. "But only if it comes with that smile." She looked at him for a brief moment, amusement flickering in her eyes before she replied coolly, "We serve all our passengers with a smile, sir." There was something in her tone, polite but distant, as though she'd heard 1,000 such lines before and found none of them impressive. Ethan chuckled softly, brushing off her calm deflection. He wasn't used to being brushed aside so easily, and that only made him more intrigued. As the plane took off and the city lights faded below, Ethan tried again. He asked questions: where she was from, how long she'd worked with the airline, if she liked her job. She answered each politely, never rude, but always brief. There was a quiet confidence in her, the kind that didn't need validation, the kind that came from power, not performance. And yet Ethan couldn't quite place it. Something about her felt familiar, but he couldn't pinpoint where he might have seen her before. When meal service began, she approached again. Ethan, ever the conversationalist, seized the opportunity. "You know," he said as she set down his tray, "you have the kind of poise that doesn't come from just customer service training. You remind me of someone, maybe someone in management." She paused briefly, meeting his gaze with a hint of amusement. "I suppose confidence looks the same at any altitude," she said before walking away. Ethan blinked, surprised at her sharpness. There was wit behind that smile, something intelligent, deliberate. As the flight went on, Ethan's curiosity grew. He noticed how the other attendants seemed to look to her subtly for direction, a nod here, a quick word there. She wasn't just any crew member. She carried herself like someone in charge, though she wore no visible distinction. He found himself watching her every move, how effortlessly she handled difficult passengers, how she balanced grace with authority. The more he observed, the more intrigued he became. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was admiration. Whoever she was no ordinary flight attendant. Hours passed. The cabin lights dimmed, passengers drifted to sleep, and Ethan reclined his seat, pretending to read while his thoughts wandered. He thought about the company he worked for, Rise Technologies, and the upcoming leadership conference in Singapore. Their CEO was supposed to make an appearance, though Ethan had never met her in person. Rumor had it she was brilliant, young for her position, and fiercely private. Her name was Ava Lawson, a visionary leader known for her intelligence and bold decisions. Ethan admired her from afar, though he'd only seen her in official company photos. He smiled faintly at the thought. Imagine running into someone like her on a plane, he mused silently. Just then the flight attendant returned, checking on the passengers. She leaned slightly toward him, her voice soft but professional. "Can I get you anything else before we start our descent, Mr. Ross?" He looked up, startled. "You know my name?" he asked, impressed. She gave a polite smile. "It's on the manifest," she replied simply. But something in her tone hinted she knew more than that. Ethan, amused, tried one last time. "You've got a great memory. Maybe after we land I could buy you a coffee that isn't served at 30,000 feet. This time her smile changed. It wasn't dismissive or polite. It was knowing. "I think we'll have that coffee soon enough, Mr. Ross," she said, before turning away. Her voice carried a quiet certainty that left him puzzled. What did she mean by soon enough? As the plane descended through the clouds and the city lights of Singapore shimmered beneath them, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like a puzzle piece he hadn't yet placed. When the plane landed and the passengers began to disembark, she stood near the exit, thanking each person with that same calm smile. When Ethan reached her, he paused. "It was a pleasure meeting you," he said sincerely. "I never caught your name." She tilted her head slightly, eyes glinting. "You'll find out soon," she said, and with that she turned to greet the next passenger. Ethan walked through the jet bridge, confused but intrigued beyond measure. Her words echoed in his mind as he made his way to baggage claim. "You'll find out soon." He shook his head, chuckling. Mysterious and beautiful. Figures. Hours later, after checking into his hotel and preparing for the conference, Ethan received a message from HR. Reminder, executive briefing with CEO Ava Lawson, 9:01 a.m. sharp. He smiled, straightening his tie in the mirror. Time to impress the boss, he said to himself. He entered the grand conference hall the next morning, filled with colleagues and industry leaders. The stage was set with a massive LED screen displaying the company logo, Rise Technologies, leading the future. The room fell silent as the host announced, "Please welcome our CEO, Ms. Ava Lawson." Applause erupted. Ethan looked up, and his heart stopped. Walking onto the stage in a tailored suit exuding confidence and grace was the same woman from the flight. The flight attendant. Her hair was the same, her poise identical, but now she stood under bright lights with an authority that silenced the room. She spoke clearly, her voice calm and powerful. "Good morning, everyone. I trust you all had a pleasant journey here." Her gaze flickered briefly across the audience, and for a fleeting second, locked with Ethan's. A small, knowing smile curved her lips. In that instant, everything clicked. The uniform, the poise, the confidence. It wasn't a coincidence. She hadn't been a flight attendant by chance. She was testing him. Ethan sank slightly into his seat, his cheeks burning as the realization hit him like turbulence. The woman he'd tried to flirt with was not just his superior. She was the CEO of the entire company, and she knew exactly who he was the whole time. Ethan sat frozen in his seat, unable to process what he had just seen. The conference room buzzed with energy, executives whispering, analysts tapping on tablets, cameras flashing. But for him, everything blurred into a low hum. The woman who now commanded the stage, speaking with precision and authority, was the same one he had tried to flirt with less than 24 hours ago. Ava Lawson, his CEO, his company's visionary leader, had been right there, serving drinks, answering questions with polite restraint, and watching him unknowingly embarrass himself at 30,000 feet. His stomach twisted in knots as flashes of their in-flight conversation replayed in his mind. "Maybe after we land, I could buy you a coffee that isn't served at 30,000 feet? He cringed internally. Every word now sounded painfully naive. Ava's voice snapped him back to reality. "At Rise Technologies," she said, pacing the stage with effortless control, "we don't just innovate, we evolve. Our strength comes from adaptability, from being unafraid to challenge norms and step out of comfort zones." Her gaze swept across the audience before landing, just for a heartbeat, on Ethan. Her eyes didn't linger, but that brief connection sent a jolt of realization through him. That entire in-flight encounter, her composure, her cryptic words, even her teasing smile, had all been intentional. She had known exactly who he was. As she continued speaking, Ethan's thoughts raced. Was she testing him? Was it some kind of leadership experiment? Or had he simply been the unlucky fool who didn't recognize his own CEO, disguised in a flight attendant's uniform? Whatever the reason, the situation was humiliating. He tried to focus on her presentation, but every sentence she spoke seemed to echo his embarrassment. When the session ended, applause filled the hall. Ava thanked the audience graciously and exited through a side door with her assistant. Ethan stood there for a moment, uncertain what to do. He wanted to disappear, to crawl under a seat and never be seen again. But he also needed to face the situation before rumors spread. After a deep breath, he decided to find her. The company's executive lounge was bustling with employees eager to greet the CEO, but Ava wasn't there. Her assistant, a tall man named Jordan, stood near the entrance reviewing notes on a tablet. Ethan approached him cautiously. "Excuse me, Jordan," he said, trying to sound composed. "Do you know if Ms. Lawson is available? I'd like to have a quick word." Jordan looked up, raised an eyebrow, and studied him for a moment. "Ethan Ross, right? Marketing division?" Ethan nodded. "She's in her private meeting room upstairs," Jordan said. "But I wouldn't recommend disturbing her unless you've got something urgent." Ethan hesitated. "It's about something that happened on the flight yesterday." Jordan's lips curved slightly as if he already knew. "Ah," he said quietly. "I'll let her know you're here." A few tense minutes later, Jordan returned. "She'll see you now," he said, motioning toward a sleek glass door at the end of the hallway. Ethan's heart pounded as he approached. He could see her through the glass. Ava sitting at a minimalist desk typing on a laptop. Her jacket was off, revealing a crisp white blouse. Her hair was tied in a neat bun, and she looked composed, professional, untouchable. As he stepped inside, she glanced up briefly, then gestured toward the seat across from her. "Mr. Ross," she said calmly. "Please have a seat." Ethan sat down, trying to steady his voice. "Ms. Lawson," he began, I owe you an apology." She closed her laptop slowly, folding her hands atop it. "For what exactly?" she asked, her tone neutral but sharp enough to make him flinch. "For my behavior on the flight," he said. "I didn't realize who you were. I was just—" She raised an eyebrow slightly, cutting him off. "Trying to charm a flight attendant?" she finished. Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes, and I'm truly sorry if I made you uncomfortable. That wasn't my intention." Ava studied him quietly for a few moments. The silence stretched long enough to make Ethan squirm. Finally, she said, "Mr. Ross, I wasn't uncomfortable. I was observing." He blinked, confused. "Observing?" She nodded. "You see, I occasionally like to conduct what I call leadership immersion tests. I step into different environments within the company. Sometimes as a consultant, sometimes as a customer, and yes, sometimes as a service worker, to see how my employees interact when they think no one's watching." She leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. "You were one of several employees on that flight, actually. But you, Mr. Ross, stood out." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Stood out how?" he asked cautiously. "You're charming, confident, articulate," Ava said evenly. "But you also made assumptions. You saw someone in a uniform and immediately categorized her. Friendly, approachable, someone you could impress. You didn't stop to consider that she might be your equal, or even your superior." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but stopped himself. "She wasn't wrong. I didn't mean any disrespect," he said quietly. "I genuinely thought I was just having a normal conversation." Ava gave a faint smile. "Normal conversation is fine, Ethan, but perception matters. The way you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you. That's what defines character. And I wanted to see yours." She stood up then, walking to the window overlooking the city skyline. "You're good at your job. Your reports are strong. Your creativity is valuable. But in leadership, charisma without awareness is dangerous." Ethan's shame was quickly replaced by introspection. "You're right," he admitted. "I acted carelessly. I should have been more mindful." She turned to face him, her expression softening just slightly. "That's all I wanted to hear," she said. "We all make mistakes. The key is to learn from them." There was a pause, heavy but not hostile. Ethan stood, gathering his composure. "Thank you for giving me the chance to apologize in person," he said. Ava nodded. "Consider it forgotten," she replied. "But let's not pretend it didn't happen. I expect to see that same confidence you had on the plane, just directed toward your work this time." Her tone carried both authority and a touch of humor. Ethan smiled faintly. "You'll have it," he promised. As he turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and Ethan?" He stopped at the door. "Yes?" She gave him a small, knowing smile. "Next time you want to offer someone coffee, Make sure it's not part of their job to serve it." He laughed nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "Noted, ma'am." When he stepped out of the room, he exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of embarrassment lift just a little. What had started as humiliation had turned into a lesson, one he wouldn't forget anytime soon. Still, as he walked down the corridor, a part of him couldn't help but marvel at Ava Lawson. She wasn't just intelligent or powerful. She was perceptive, strategic, and unafraid to test those who worked for her. He admired that. And if he was being honest, he admired her even more than before. Later that evening at the company's networking dinner, the tension between them took on a different tone. The event was held in a grand ballroom overlooking the city. Soft jazz played in the background as employees mingled, glasses of champagne in hand. Ethan arrived early, determined to stay professional. But when Ava entered the room, conversation paused for just a moment, as though everyone silently acknowledged her presence. She wore an elegant black dress, minimalist jewelry, and that same composed confidence that made people stand taller in her presence. Throughout the evening, Ethan kept his distance, focusing on conversations with clients and team members. Yet he couldn't help but notice the subtle glances Ava cast his way, not cold but curious. At one point, she approached the group he was standing with. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said smoothly. "Mr. Ross, I hope you're enjoying the evening." Ethan smiled politely. "Very much so, Ms. Lawson. The event is beautifully arranged." "Thank you," she said. "I trust you've recovered from the flight?" The group laughed lightly, unaware of the hidden meaning behind her words. Ethan grinned sheepishly. "Completely," he replied. "I even thought about switching careers to flight service, but I'm afraid I'd fail the leadership test." Ava's smile widened, genuine this time. "Let's keep you in marketing then," she said. "You might just be useful there after all." The table chuckled again, and for the first time since the flight, Ethan felt the tension between them dissolve into something almost friendly. As the night went on, the two crossed paths several times, once near the buffet, once by the balcony. Each time there was an unspoken understanding, a subtle acknowledgement that their dynamic had changed. What had begun as a mortifying mistake was slowly evolving into mutual respect. When the event finally ended, Ethan stood outside the hotel, the cool night air brushing against his face. He saw Ava exit moments later, her assistant trailing behind with files. She caught his eye and offered a small nod. "Good night, Mr. Ross," she said. "Good night, Ms. Lawson," he replied. Then after a pause he added, "And thank you, not just for forgiving me, but for teaching me something I didn't even realize I needed to learn." Ava regarded him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "That's what leadership is about, Ethan. Growth, not perfection. Remember that." With that, she stepped into her car and disappeared into the city lights, leaving him standing there, humbled yet inspired. As he watched her car fade from sight, Ethan couldn't help but smile. Life, he realized, had a strange sense of humor. One day you're flirting with a stranger in the sky. The next, she's teaching you the most important lesson of your career, and deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of something far more transformative than a simple business trip. The morning after the networking dinner, Ethan awoke with a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. The embarrassment from the flight had faded somewhat, replaced by an intense desire to prove himself. He dressed carefully in a crisp white shirt and navy blazer, rehearsing his presentations and notes for the day's conference sessions. He arrived early at the convention center, determined to focus on the work rather than replay his in-flight faux pas. But try as he might, his mind kept drifting to Ava Lawson. The memory of her knowing smile, her calm composure, and the subtle acknowledgement at the dinner gnawed at him. He couldn't deny it. He admired her, professionally, unquestionably. But there was also a spark of personal intrigue he couldn't easily ignore. The conference hall buzzed with executives, analysts, and media personnel. Ethan moved through the crowd, exchanging handshakes and brief conversations, but a part of him remained hyper-aware of Ava's presence. At 10 a.m., the main session began, with Ava at the center stage delivering a keynote that commanded attention without a hint of arrogance. Her speech was articulate and inspiring, emphasizing innovation, resilience, and the power of teamwork. But there were moments when her gaze swept across the audience and lingered, just long enough to make Ethan's pulse quicken. He realized that she had a presence that didn't demand submission, but naturally inspired respect. After the keynote, Ava stepped down and began walking through the crowd, engaging with attendees. When she approached the marketing team, Ethan's heart thudded. She stopped in front of him, offering a firm handshake. "Mr. Ross," she said, her tone calm but carrying that familiar spark of command. "I hear you've been preparing the new campaign for our Southeast Asia launch." Ethan nodded, swallowing his nerves. "Yes, Ms. Lawson. I've been refining the strategy and aligning the messaging with our core values. I'd appreciate any feedback you might have." Ava's eyes studied him carefully, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Good," she said simply. "I want to see you present it to me personally. We'll have a brief session this afternoon." Ethan felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. This was an incredible opportunity, but it was also intimidating. The woman he had once mistaken for a flight attendant would now scrutinize his work firsthand. The morning dragged on as Ethan prepared for the session, meticulously reviewing slides, adjusting data points and rehearsing his speech. He imagined every possible question Ava might ask, every criticism she might levy, and even scenarios where he could impress her. When the time finally came, he followed the assistant into a glass-walled conference room where Ava was already seated, reviewing a stack of reports. Her demeanor was calm and unflinching, radiating authority. Ethan took a deep breath and began his presentation. Minutes passed, and Ethan spoke with precision, confidence, and clarity. He showcased market analysis, campaign strategies, and projections with detailed explanations. He emphasized the creative elements, data-driven decisions, and the anticipated impact on the company's growth in the region. Ava listened silently, her eyes scanning the slides, occasionally nodding slightly. There was no interruption, no overt feedback, only the intense scrutiny of someone who expected excellence. Ethan's initial anxiety transformed into a focused determination. He realized that this wasn't about impressing her socially. It was about demonstrating his professional capability, earning respect on merit. When he concluded, there was a pause. Ava looked up, her expression unreadable for a moment. Ethan braced for critique. Then she spoke, her voice calm, authoritative, but with a hint of approval. "Well done, Mr. Ross. You've clearly put a great deal of effort into this. Your strategy is sound and your analysis is thorough. There are a few adjustments I'd suggest for regional nuances, but overall this is impressive." Relief flooded him, but he forced himself to remain composed. "Thank you, Ms. Lawson. I welcome your feedback. I want this campaign to succeed in every way possible." Ava's gaze softened slightly, a rare break in her professional armor. "I can see that," she said. "And that willingness to learn, to accept guidance and apply it effectively, is what makes a strong leader. Remember, talent alone isn't enough. Adaptability and humility are equally important." Her words resonated deeply with Ethan. He realized that the flight incident, the embarrassment and the confrontation, had been a subtle but critical lesson in perspective and personal growth. After the meeting, Ava offered an unexpected opportunity. "Ethan," she said, "I'd like you to lead the pilot phase of this campaign in Singapore. You'll report directly to me, and I want weekly updates. Consider this a test of not just your marketing acumen, but your leadership potential." Ethan felt a surge of excitement and gratitude. This was beyond anything he had anticipated. A direct opportunity to work alongside the CEO, to demonstrate his skills, and to grow professionally. "I won't disappoint you, Ms. Lawson," he said sincerely. She smiled faintly, the same enigmatic smile from the flight, carrying both authority and subtle warmth. "I know you won't," she said. "And Ethan, don't forget what you learned on the flight. Confidence is valuable, but awareness and respect are what truly distinguish someone in this company." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Ethan coordinated with international teams, fine-tuned campaign elements, and navigated logistical challenges. Every decision he made, every interaction he had, reminded him of Ava's words, the importance of perception, humility, and leadership. He found himself thinking less about impressing others superficially and more about building genuine credibility and trust. Throughout the campaign, Ava checked in regularly. Her presence was demanding but encouraging, pushing Ethan to exceed his limits while offering guidance when necessary. Each meeting reinforced his admiration for her intelligence, decisiveness, and unspoken strength. He realized that her time as a flight attendant had not only been a test but also a lesson in leadership from a vantage point he had never considered. Observing people without their knowledge, seeing who they truly were. By the end of the first week, the campaign pilot was launched successfully, receiving positive early feedback from clients and partners. Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything he had experienced before. He reflected on the journey, from the embarrassing moment in the airplane to this professional triumph, and recognized how much he had grown, not just as a marketer but as a person. Late one evening, after the team had dispersed, Ava approached him in the office hallway. "You've done well, Ethan," she said, her tone measured but approving. "Remember, leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being respected, about inspiring confidence and trust. You've shown you can do that even under pressure." Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of validation. "Thank you, Ms. Lawson. I've learned more in the past few days than I thought possible." She paused, giving him a brief, knowing look. "And remember," she said with a faint smile, "sometimes the most unexpected lessons come from the strangest encounters." Ethan chuckled softly, recalling the flight once more. He realized that life, and especially leadership, had a way of testing people in the most unconventional ways. And those tests often became the moments that defined them. That night, as Ethan left the office, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and anticipation. The embarrassment of the past had transformed into an opportunity for growth and mentorship, and he knew that this journey was just beginning. Working alongside Ava Lawson, learning from her and navigating the challenges ahead would shape him in ways he had never imagined. And while he would never forget the humbling moment in the airplane, he understood that it had been the catalyst for one of the most important and transformative chapters of his career. Ethan walked into the quiet streets of Singapore, the city lights reflecting off the pavement, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer the man who had flirted recklessly on a flight. He was someone capable of humility, insight, and leadership, and, deep down, he knew that the challenges ahead would not only test his professional abilities but also his character, and he was ready for them. The days following the Singapore campaign launch were a whirlwind for Ethan. Each morning began with meticulous planning sessions, conference calls spanning multiple time zones, and strategy meetings with teams both local and international. His mornings, once filled with the casual ease of routine, were now dominated by detailed analysis, client feedback, and the constant evaluation of metrics. Yet amidst the flurry of work, a sense of purpose and clarity guided him. The humiliation from the flight had been transformed into motivation, and he approached each task with the diligence and awareness that Ava Lawson had instilled in him. Every decision carried weight, every action mattered, and he felt a responsibility not just to the company but to the trust she had placed in him. Ava, as always, remained a commanding presence. She was precise in her feedback, unwavering in her expectations, and insightful in her guidance. But over time, Ethan began to notice nuances in her behavior, small gestures, brief smiles, moments of subtle encouragement that revealed a more human side beneath her composed exterior. She had a way of observing without interference, guiding without dominance, and challenging without belittling. It was in these moments that Ethan began to understand the depth of her leadership philosophy. True authority stemmed not from control, but from the ability to inspire trust, confidence, and growth in those around her. One afternoon, as Ethan reviewed the campaign's initial results with his team, Ava entered the workspace quietly. She observed the presentation, her eyes moving across graphs, metrics, and projections with sharp attention. "The engagement rate in the Singapore market is promising," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "However, I noticed the social media outreach could be more aligned with local cultural trends. Adapt your messaging accordingly." Ethan nodded, absorbing her feedback. "Absolutely, Ms. Lawson. We'll adjust the campaign immediately." She gave a faint smile, a brief acknowledgement of his competence, before moving on to another team member. It was small, but for Ethan that subtle sign of approval carried immense meaning. In the following days, Ethan found himself reflecting constantly on Ava's approach. He realized that her time as a flight attendant had been more than a test. It was a demonstration of leadership from a perspective most employees would never see. She had taken the time to observe, to understand, and to challenge without confrontation. It forced him to confront his assumptions, to examine his behavior, and to grow not only as a professional but as a person. He began applying these lessons broadly, not just in meetings with Ava but with his own team. He listened more attentively, valued diverse perspectives, and approached problems with humility rather than haste. The Singapore campaign's mid-phase review presented a new challenge. Competitors were launching similar initiatives, and early data suggested that audience engagement in certain demographics was underperforming. Ethan felt the familiar tension of responsibility, knowing that the success of the campaign and his credibility rested on his response. He worked late into the night, analyzing data, testing alternative strategies, and consulting with his team for fresh perspectives. By morning, he had devised a refined plan, targeted messaging, localized promotions, and strategic partnerships designed to maximize reach and engagement. When he presented the revised strategy to Ava, she listened intently, her expression unreadable. Ethan detailed every adjustment, explaining the rationale behind each decision and demonstrating how it addressed the previous shortcomings. When he finished, a pause filled the room. Ava regarded him for a long moment, her eyes meeting his with a combination of assessment and acknowledgement. "This is thoughtful and strategic," she said finally. "You've not only identified the problem but developed a comprehensive solution that accounts for multiple variables." "Excellent work, Ethan." Relief and pride coursed through him. Her approval wasn't superficial. It was rooted in genuine recognition of skill and effort. As the campaign progressed, Ethan and Ava's professional interactions began to take on a nuanced dynamic. Outside of formal meetings, there were moments of casual conversation, brief exchanges over coffee in the office, hallway discussions about industry trends, or comments on the efficiency of a particular process. These interactions were light yet meaningful, blending professional mentorship with subtle personal connection. Ethan noticed that Ava's demeanor, while consistently authoritative, occasionally softened. A rare warmth in her expressions, a hint of humor in her words, or a brief acknowledgement of shared experiences. It was in these fleeting moments that Ethan's admiration for her deepened, not just as a CEO or mentor, but as a person of intelligence, integrity, and subtle charm. One evening, after a particularly long day of campaign troubleshooting, Ava invited Ethan to join her in reviewing final engagement metrics over dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The setting was intimate yet professional, the skyline glowing with lights, the air crisp and vibrant, and the atmosphere charged with a subtle energy that went beyond the usual corporate interactions. Over the course of the evening, they discussed campaign performance, strategies for further improvement, and lessons learned from previous initiatives. But gradually the conversation shifted to broader topics: leadership philosophies, personal growth, and the challenges of balancing ambition with humility. Ethan found himself opening up in ways he rarely had in professional contexts. He shared insights about his career journey, moments of self-doubt, and the lessons learned from past mistakes. Ava listened attentively, offering perspective, probing thoughtfully, and occasionally sharing her own experiences, challenges she had faced early in her career, moments of misjudgment, and the strategies she employed to overcome them. The dialogue was candid and intellectually stimulating, yet carried an undercurrent of mutual respect and growing rapport. As the evening progressed, Ethan recognized a shift in his perception of Ava. She was no longer just the formidable CEO he had mistakenly flirted with on a flight. She was a mentor, a guide, and someone who had earned his deepest professional admiration. The connection between them had evolved from the awkwardness of mistaken identity to a dynamic of mentorship, collaboration, and mutual respect. He understood that their relationship, though rooted in corporate hierarchy, had the potential to transcend conventional boundaries, shaped instead by trust, insight, and shared growth. When the evening concluded, they walked together to the elevator, a quiet understanding lingering between them. Ava turned to him with a composed yet warm expression. "Ethan, remember that leadership is a journey, not a destination," she said. "The lessons you learn along the way, sometimes from unexpected circumstances, shape not just your career but your character. Keep that in mind as you continue to grow." Ethan nodded, deeply aware of the weight of her words. "I will, Ms. Lawson," he replied. "Thank you for everything, for guiding me and for teaching me the value of awareness, humility, and thoughtful leadership." As he returned to his hotel room that night, Ethan reflected on the past few days. What had begun as an embarrassing encounter on a flight had evolved into an extraordinary opportunity for growth, mentorship, and professional development. He realized that Ava's approach, observing, challenging, and guiding with subtlety, had instilled in him a deeper understanding of leadership, responsibility, and personal integrity. The Singapore skyline twinkled outside his window, and Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer the impulsive young executive who had relied solely on charm and confidence. He had learned to balance ambition with humility, talent with awareness, and initiative with thoughtfulness. And while the journey ahead was uncertain, he was prepared to face it with clarity, resilience, and a newfound respect for the lessons that life, and sometimes the most unexpected encounters on it, could teach. By the time the weekend arrived, the campaign had stabilized, performance metrics were strong, and Ethan had earned the quiet acknowledgement of Ava, a recognition that transcended mere approval and touched the essence of professional validation. He knew that the challenges ahead would only grow, but he now possessed the insight, resilience, and guidance to navigate them effectively, and as he prepared to return home, he carried with him not just the pride of accomplishment, but the profound understanding that true growth often emerges from the most unexpected lessons and encounters. In those moments of reflection, Ethan smiled, realizing that life had an uncanny way of teaching its most important lessons when least expected, sometimes at 30,000 feet, sometimes in a quiet office, and sometimes in the presence of someone whose intelligence, perception, and guidance could reshape not only a career, but an entire perspective on life. The final days of the Singapore campaign arrived with a sense of culmination and anticipation. Ethan had worked tirelessly, ensuring every detail was executed flawlessly, each team member aligned, and every metric analyzed and optimized. The project had evolved from a challenging test of skill into an extraordinary opportunity for growth, mentorship, and professional recognition. As Ethan prepared for the final presentation to Ava Lawson, he felt a mixture of nervousness and confidence. The man who had once flirted recklessly with a flight attendant had transformed into a composed, diligent professional, ready to demonstrate his leadership, insight, and commitment. The morning of the final presentation, Ethan entered the company's glass-walled executive boardroom, polished and prepared. Ava Lawson was already there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, reviewing documents with her characteristic focus. Her presence was commanding yet calm, the perfect balance of authority and subtle warmth. When she noticed Ethan, she gave a brief, approving nod, a small gesture that conveyed both recognition and expectation. Ethan set up his laptop and began presenting the final results of the campaign: engagement metrics, regional market penetration, social media performance, client feedback, and projected growth trends. As he spoke, Ava listened intently, her expression unreadable but thoughtful. Ethan noticed that her eyes occasionally flicked toward the charts, then back to him, as if measuring not only the data but also the confidence, clarity, and conviction with which he delivered it. He articulated insights, defended strategies, and highlighted innovations, all while remaining composed under the subtle scrutiny of the CEO who had once tested him in disguise. He realized in that moment that every lesson she had imparted, humility, awareness, strategic thinking, and adaptability, had coalesced into the professional he was now presenting. When he concluded, there was a moment of silence, charged, deliberate, and weighty. Ava leaned back slightly, folding her hands, and studied him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "Ethan," she said finally, her tone calm but resonant, "you've exceeded my expectations. The campaign's results are impressive, and your ability to navigate challenges, adapt strategies, and lead your team demonstrates remarkable growth." Relief and pride surged through Ethan, tempered by the recognition that this praise carried both validation and responsibility. "Thank you, Ms. Lawson," he replied sincerely. "It's been a privilege to work under your guidance." She smiled faintly, the same enigmatic expression that had captivated him since the flight. "Guidance is only part of it," she said. "You've applied what you've learned, You've taken lessons from unexpected situations and transformed them into results. That's leadership, that's growth, and that's what sets exceptional individuals apart. Ethan felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He realized that this journey, beginning with a moment of humiliation and misunderstanding, had evolved into a profound opportunity for mentorship, professional development, and self-awareness. After the presentation, Ava invited Ethan to walk with her along the office terrace overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the skyline, illuminating the glass and steel buildings in a way that seemed to symbolize clarity, perspective, and achievement. The breeze was gentle, carrying the faint hum of the city below. Ethan felt a mixture of awe and gratitude, aware that this was a rare moment, a quiet, reflective space shared with the mentor who had challenged, guided, and inspired him. "You've come a long way since our flight," Ava said, her tone calm but reflective. Ethan chuckled softly, remembering the embarrassment of that day. "I can't believe I ever thought flirting would impress you," he admitted. Ava's smile held both amusement and wisdom. "Confidence is valuable, Ethan," she said. "But what truly matters is awareness, humility, and respect. You've internalized that lesson, and it shows." They paused to watch the sunset, the city lights beginning to twinkle below. Ethan felt a sense of peace, tempered by the awareness that his journey had only just begun. The lessons he had learned, from the flight, from the campaign, and from Ava's mentorship, were not merely professional tools. They were life lessons, shaping his perspective, character, and approach to challenges. As the evening progressed, Ava shifted the conversation from professional reflection to broader perspectives. They discussed industry trends, global challenges, and innovative strategies for growth. She shared insights into her own journey, the obstacles she had faced, the mistakes she had learned from, and the strategies that had allowed her to succeed. Ethan listened intently, absorbing every word, realizing that the person he had once underestimated on a plane was not only a brilliant leader but also an individual of depth, intelligence, and resilience. When the time came to leave, Ava turned to him with a faint smile. "Ethan," she said, "this campaign marks a significant milestone, but it's also a beginning. You've shown remarkable potential, and I intend to provide further opportunities for growth, responsibility, and leadership within the company." Ethan felt a surge of excitement and gratitude. "I won't let you down, Ms. Lawson," he said earnestly. She studied him for a moment, her gaze penetrating yet approving. "I know you won't," she replied. "And remember, the most unexpected lessons often lead to the most profound growth. Keep that in mind as you continue your journey." Her words resonated deeply. Ethan realized that life had a way of teaching lessons in unconventional ways, sometimes through embarrassment, sometimes through challenges, and sometimes through encounters that seemed ordinary, but were transformative in hindsight. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's responsibilities expanded. He led follow-up campaigns, coordinated with international teams, and took on strategic planning for upcoming initiatives. Throughout it all, Ava continued to provide guidance, subtle, insightful, and empowering. She challenged him to think critically, to anticipate problems before they arose, and to lead with both intelligence and empathy. Each interaction reinforced the lessons of humility, awareness, and thoughtful leadership that had begun with a seemingly trivial encounter on a plane. Amidst the professional growth, a subtle personal connection began to emerge. Ethan noticed moments when Ava's demeanor softened. A brief smile when he presented a clever solution, a nod of approval during meetings, or a quiet acknowledgement of shared challenges. Their interactions, while firmly grounded in professionalism, carried a nuance of mutual respect and understanding that transcended conventional workplace dynamics. Ethan found himself inspired not only by her intellect and leadership, but also by her character, insight, and the subtle warmth she occasionally revealed. One afternoon, as they wrapped up a successful virtual meeting with international stakeholders, Ava addressed him directly. "Ethan, your ability to navigate challenges and apply what you've learned has been exemplary. I'm considering assigning you to lead an upcoming cross-continental project, reporting directly to me. It will be demanding, but I believe you're capable." Ethan felt a mix of exhilaration and determination. "I'm ready for it, Ms. Lawson," he said confidently. "I'll give it my all." Her smile was subtle but genuine. "I know you will. And remember, Growth comes not from avoiding mistakes, but from learning from them and applying those lessons consistently. Leadership is a journey, not a destination. Ethan nodded, absorbing the gravity and encouragement of her words. He realized that the flight, the initial embarrassment, and the rigorous campaign had all been steps along that journey, each moment preparing him for greater responsibility, insight, and achievement. As evening fell over the city, Ethan walked back to his hotel, reflecting on the transformation that had occurred over the past few weeks. He was no longer the impulsive, flirtatious executive who had underestimated the woman serving him coffee. He had grown into a confident, capable, and thoughtful professional, guided by mentorship, self-reflection, and the invaluable lessons that had arisen from unexpected circumstances. When he returned to his room, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The campaign had succeeded, his performance had been recognized, and his perspective had evolved. But beyond professional achievement, Ethan carried a deeper understanding. Life's most meaningful lessons often emerge from moments of vulnerability, humility, and unexpected challenge. And sometimes the person who delivers that lesson, in this case, Ava Lawson, can leave a lasting impression not just on a career, but on one's character. As he gazed out at the city lights reflecting on the harbor, Ethan smiled softly. He knew that the journey ahead would bring new challenges, opportunities, and lessons, but he was prepared. He had learned to balance ambition with awareness, confidence with humility, and talent with thoughtful leadership. And deep down, he understood that this was only the beginning of a professional and personal journey that would shape him in ways he had never imagined, all sparked by a chance encounter on a flight, an initial misjudgment, and the extraordinary guidance of a remarkable CEO. Ethan felt a sense of clarity, purpose, and anticipation. Life, he realized, had a way of weaving the unexpected into the fabric of growth. The flight, the campaign, the mentorship, they had all led to this moment of transformation. And as the city lights shimmered in the night, he knew that his journey was far from over. It was only beginning, and he was ready to embrace every challenge, lesson, and opportunity that lay ahead, guided by the wisdom, insight, and presence of the woman who had changed everything. Ava Lawson.